My name is Leora Vale, 18 years old. At dinner, Dad asked if my allowance was enough, the way you ask about weather when a storm is already knocking at the windows. My fork was halfway to my mouth when I said, "What allowance?" And the whole room seemed to pause, his face draining of color, Mom's jaw locking around a bite of pot roast she no longer wanted, the air thick with a question we hadn't meant to summon. "What do you mean? What allowance?" Dad's voice rasped, thinner than the steam rising off the mashed potatoes. I looked between them. "I've never gotten one. I've been working at the grocery store since I was 14 to pay for gas and clothes." Mom set her fork down very carefully, as if the table had become a scale. "Honey, your father has been transferring you $200 every month since you were 12. My stomach dropped like a cup on a tile floor. No, he hasn't. Chairs scraped. Dad pushed back and walked fast to his office. We heard drawers open and slam, paper shuffling like wings. When he returned, he carried a folder the way people carry bad news. He spread bank statements across the table and knocked the salt shaker over. "Look," he said, jabbing a finger at a line of transactions. $200 every month for 6 years. I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and turned the screen toward him. "I have $1,100 total. That's from 20 hours a week these last 4 months. Mom leaned over, eyes narrowing, comparing numbers. Silence stretched until the kitchen clock's tick felt accusatory. "Richard," she whispered, "this account number is different." Dad's throat worked. "That's impossible. I set up transfers to Leora's account, her college account." He looked at me for confirmation I couldn't give. "Whose account is this money going to?" I asked. The question hung between us like a draft. He called the bank the next morning before they opened, coffee going cold beside his elbow. I sat with him through 3 representatives and 2 sets of hold music. When a supervisor named Patricia finally came on, Dad explained a 4th time, voice trembling at words he'd always said with authority. Routing numbers, custodial account, automatic transfer. "Mr. Vale," Patricia said, "I've located the destination account. The funds have been going to an account under the name Leah Morrison Chen." Dad's face drained again, like the night before. "That's not my daughter's name," Patricia continued, crisp and unbothered. "According to our records, the account was opened by your wife, Donna, in 2018. Your wife is listed as the account holder and Ms. Leah Morrison Chen as the beneficiary." I turned to Mom. She was very still on the bar stool, hands around a coffee mug she wasn't drinking. "That's impossible," Dad whispered. "My wife is sitting right here." Patricia repeated the details slowly, as if the repetition might force reality to align. When the call ended, Mom stood, set the mug down with a soft chime, and reached for her keys. "I can explain," she said. "Just give me a minute." "Where are you going?" I asked. "To make a phone call." The door closed behind her, and a minute later, the car engine trembled the windows. That's when I noticed the manila envelope peeking out from her purse, abandoned by the door. I picked it up and felt the weight of paper that knows more than people do. Inside were documents that didn't match the rules of our life. Hospital records from the day I was born, listing my mother as Amy Chen and father as unknown. Adoption papers dated when I was 3 months old. A photograph of a baby that was me, except the woman holding me wasn't Donna. On the back, in Mom's handwriting, Leah's first mother. Goodbye for now. There was also a letter, dated last week. "My dearest Leah," it began. "I know this must be confusing, but the woman you call Mom has been sending me updates about you for years. She promised that when you turned 18 we could finally meet. The account she set up was my way of contributing to your upbringing from a distance. I've been working 2 jobs to make sure I could send that money every month. I love you so much, and I can't wait to tell you why I had to give you up." The words blurred. Dad leaned over my shoulder, eyes scanning faster than his understanding could keep up. "Who is that woman?" I held up the hospital form. "This says I was adopted." He stared at the page, then at me, like he could rearrange the letters with the force of his gaze. Yes," he said at last, and the floor shifted a half-inch lower. "Your mother asked me not to tell you. She said it would confuse you. I thought, We were protecting you. He swallowed. I thought those transfers were going to your account. Donna handled the rest. Protecting me from what? The question came out smaller than I intended. He didn't answer. We spread the papers across the table the way investigators do in movies, except this was our table and our life. There were too many signatures, and one of them looked practiced, as if someone had learned to copy herself. Receipts lined up with renovation timelines. A car purchased the same month, half a dozen transfers cleared. A note from a social worker whose name I didn't recognize, promising temporary placement and visitation options, phrases that skittered like insects when you turned on the light. 3 hours later, the front door opened and closed. Mom stood in the doorway, took in the paper map of our family, and sat without being asked. She stared at the letter from Amy as if it were a flare. How long have you been taking her money? I asked. My voice surprised me, low, steady. It wasn't stealing, Mom said too quickly. That money was for you. I was saving it. Dad's face pinched. Donna, where is it? Her silence filled the room like smoke. We needed it, she said finally. The house, the car, tuition. You used my first mother's money for a backsplash, I said. Mom flinched. She's not your mother, she snapped, then caught herself, softened her tone into something rehearsed. I am. I raised you. I stayed up when you were sick, drove you to practice, edited your essays. She stopped. She had always been strongest making lists. You also took me away from the person who wanted to do those things, I said. She was 17, Mom shot back. She had no support. We saved you from a life of instability. The word saved pinged around the kitchen and wouldn't land. Did you ask her if she wanted to be saved from me? I asked. Dad's eyes were on the signatures. Donna, he said without looking up, why is the notary stamp from a county we don't live in? Mom's gaze flicked to the page, then to the window, then back. It was legal, she said, and the word sounded too small for what it was trying to carry. Everything we did was legal. Legal doesn't mean right, I said, hearing how much older I sounded than I felt. We sat like that, 3 people at a table, 4 if you counted the truth, all of us trying not to breathe too loudly. In the envelope, a second letter I hadn't seen yet pressed against my palm like a heartbeat. I didn't open it. Instead, I looked at Mom and asked the question that would either end or begin something. How long, I said, have you been stealing from her? It wasn't stealing, Mom repeated, but softer this time, and for the first time since the word allowance detonated our life. She didn't sound sure of anything at all. The phone call to Amy Chen was the strangest thing I've ever done, and yet it felt inevitable. When I dialed, my hand trembled, and I could hear the unfamiliarity in my breath as it caught in my throat. Amy's voice, soft with a rasp, reached me on the first ring, as though she had been waiting for it. Leia? Her voice broke the space between us, like the bridge we had never built. It's me, I said, my words small, fragile, but full of everything I had never said before. She started crying, but there was a tenderness in her voice, a warmth that wrapped around me, even through the distance. Oh, honey, I've been waiting for this call for 18 years. Her words rang in my ears as I tried to make sense of what I was hearing. The life I had lived, the life she had lived, so different, yet so painfully intertwined. Amy spoke slowly, revealing everything she had been carrying. The 16-year-old girl with a premature baby, the social worker who promised her that she could visit me, the countless hours spent looking for me. She spoke of a life that seemed foreign yet familiar. She told me about the clothes she had bought for me before I was born, the names she had picked out, the dreams she had woven for a child she didn't know how to keep. When she told me about the money, my chest tightened. She had been sending $200 every month, like clockwork, a lifeline she believed was securing my future, ensuring I never felt the absence of the mother who had given me up. I've been working 2 jobs, she said, voice steady but filled with the strain of years of sacrifice. I didn't have much, but I always wanted you to have something, even from a distance. Did you know where that money went? I asked, the question burning as it left my lips. No, she whispered. I just wanted to be a part of your life, even if it was from the outside. The words sliced through the air, leaving nothing but raw, exposed nerves. I wanted to scream at her, at the unfairness of it all, but I couldn't. I had spent my whole life wondering why things never felt right, never understanding the hole in my heart. Now I knew, but it didn't make anything easier. "Do you want to meet me?" I asked, the question that had lingered like a shadow in my mind. "Yes," she said immediately. "I've waited my whole life for this. I can't wait to finally meet you." I could hear the trembling hope in her voice, and I knew in that moment that everything had changed. There was no going back now. I told my parents that night. Mom was quiet when I told her I had spoken to Amy. She didn't react immediately, just sat there, her hands clutching the mug of coffee she had been nursing for hours. Dad, on the other hand, seemed to deflate before my eyes, the weight of the truth settling on him like a brick. "Leora," he said softly, "are you sure about this?" I nodded, feeling something inside of me click into place. "Yes, Dad. I need to know who I am. I need to understand." Mom stood up, her face pale, her expression unreadable. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice trembling. "You don't know what she's like." "I don't care what she's like," I said, standing up and facing her. "She's my mother, the real one." Mom flinched, like the words had physically hurt her. She didn't speak again, just turned and left the room, her footsteps echoing in the silence that followed. Dad watched me for a long time. "I should have known," he whispered, his voice thick with regret. "I should have questioned everything she told me." The next day, I drove to Amy's house. The journey felt surreal, as if I was stepping into a different world, one I didn't know, but one I was starting to understand. Amy lived in a small town about 4 hours away, a town that seemed to be frozen in time, full of quiet streets and houses with peeling paint. Her house was modest, cozy even, and when she opened the door, there was no hesitation, no awkwardness. It was like stepping into a version of myself I had never known. We shared the same dark eyes, the same way of tucking our hair behind our ears when we were nervous. She held me for a long time, and in that moment, I knew everything had shifted. I wasn't a stranger to her. I was a part of her. Amy showed me her photo albums, full of pictures of her family, of my biological grandparents who I had never met. She told me about her life, about the family she had built after I was taken from her. And as we sat there, surrounded by the photos and the memories, I realized how much of me had always been missing. I had never known who I was, not fully. But now, sitting with Amy, I felt like I was starting to find out. We spent hours talking, sharing stories, laughing at how much we had in common. And when she showed me a picture of my biological grandparents, my heart twisted. I had always wondered about them, about the people who were supposed to be my family. Now they were real, just as real as Amy was. When it was time to leave, Amy hugged me tightly, promising that we would see each other again soon. I promised her the same, and as I drove back home, I couldn't stop thinking about the visit, about the years of waiting and wondering that had led me to this point. That night, when I walked into the house, Mom was sitting in the living room, her eyes red from crying. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at me, as if she was trying to figure out who I was now. Finally, she spoke. "You really think she's better than me?" she asked, her voice quiet, but full of something I couldn't quite place. I didn't know how to answer. The truth was, I didn't think Amy was better than her, but I knew that I couldn't keep living in the shadows of a lie. I had to find out who I was, even if it meant facing the pain of what Mom had done. "No," I said softly. "I think she's just another part of me." Mom's face crumpled, and for a moment I thought she might say something else, something that would make everything feel like it could go back to the way it was. But she didn't. Instead, she turned away, and the distance between us felt wider than ever before. I knew that the truth wasn't going to be easy to live with, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I was finally on the path to understanding who I really was. The next week felt like a slow-motion crash. Everything in my world, my family, my identity, the ground beneath me, shifted and buckled. I tried to keep moving forward, tried to live as though everything hadn't changed, but it was impossible. Amy and I spoke every day, our conversations filled with quiet understanding and questions that begged for answers. And when we finally met again in the same coffee shop, the world seemed to fall into place. Amy was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table near the window, her purse clasped tightly in her hands. I stood frozen at the door for a moment, watching her, seeing the resemblance between us so clearly it made my heart ache. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, just like I did. The way her eyes darted to the door when it opened, like she had been waiting for me all along. I knew then that she had been carrying me in her heart for all these years, even if she hadn't known where I was, even if she hadn't known who I was. When she saw me, her face broke into a smile, but it was shaky, uncertain, like she wasn't sure I would recognize her as much as she recognized me. "Lyora," she said softly, standing up to meet me. Her arms opened before I could even think, and I stepped forward, letting her embrace me. "You're so beautiful," she whispered into my ear, her voice shaking. I could hear the emotion in it, the weight of the years she had spent longing for me, for a connection that had been denied to both of us. We pulled apart just enough to look at each other, and I saw something in her eyes, relief, wonder, and a little bit of fear, too. I smiled back, feeling the tightness in my chest ease. "You look just like my grandmother," I said, the words surprising me, but they were true. She had the same dark eyes, the same sharp cheekbones, the same way of smiling when she was nervous. We sat down together, our conversation shifting easily, the way two people who have always known each other but never met can talk. She told me about her life, about the years she spent missing me, about the family she had built, the love she had given despite being torn apart by a decision she hadn't wanted to make. And in return, I told her about mine, about growing up with Donna and Richard, about the house I had always known but never quite felt at home in. The more we spoke, the more I realized how much of myself had been missing. My identity, my history, had always been something I couldn't fully touch, like an incomplete puzzle I could never solve. But sitting with Amy, hearing her stories, feeling her presence next to me, it was like finding the missing pieces. And then she pulled out the photo albums. She showed me pictures of her family, my biological grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins I had never met. I saw myself in their faces, the same curve of the jaw, the same laugh lines around the eyes. It was all so familiar, yet so foreign. I had spent my whole life wondering about my origins, and now I could see them in front of me, breathing and living and full of stories I had never known. I flipped through the pages slowly, my fingers brushing over the faces of people who had always been a mystery to me. One picture stood out, a photograph of my biological grandfather and grandmother taken at a family gathering. My grandfather was holding a baby, and I realized with a jolt that the baby was me. I could feel my chest tighten as I stared at the image, the faces of people who had wanted me, who had loved me, who had lost me. "This is my family," I said, more to myself than to Amy. She nodded, her hand reaching out to touch mine. "They're waiting for you," she said quietly. "They've been waiting for years, Lyora." The words hit me like a wave. It felt like I was waking up to a truth I had always known, but had never allowed myself to fully understand. I wasn't just Donna's daughter, and I wasn't just the girl they had adopted. I was part of something bigger, something that had always been there, waiting for me to find it. "I want to meet them," I said, and Amy's face lit up with joy. "You can," she said. "We can go together. They're just as eager to meet you." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. Amy and I talked about everything, about what I wanted from my future, about what she wanted for me, about the life she had built while I was out there, wondering who she was. And through it all, there was a quiet understanding between us, an unspoken connection that had been waiting for us to recognize it. When I left that day, it wasn't just to say goodbye to the girl who had raised me. It was to step into a life I had never known, but one I was finally ready to live. That night, when I returned home, I found Mom sitting in the living room, waiting. Her eyes were red, and there was something in her expression that made me hesitate. She had been quiet since I'd returned from my visit with Amy, but now she was here, her posture tense, like she was preparing for a confrontation. I sat down across from her, waiting for her to speak. For a long time, neither of us said anything. Then, in a voice too quiet, she finally asked, "Did you tell her everything?" I wasn't sure what she meant. "What do you mean?" I asked. Mom swallowed, her hands trembling. "Did you tell her that I was the one who raised you? That I gave you everything?" Her voice cracked, and I saw the desperation behind her eyes, the desperation to hold on to something that had always been hers to control. I felt the pull between us, the tug of war of what I had been and what I was becoming. "I told her everything," I said softly, "and I told her I want to know who I am. Not just the version you gave me, but the one that's been waiting all along." Mom's face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw the truth in her eyes. Not the lies she had lived with, not the walls she had built around me, but the raw, unfiltered grief of a woman who was losing her daughter for the second time. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't know how to let you go. The silence that followed was thick with years of missed chances, broken promises, and all the things we had never said. But in that moment, I realized something I hadn't before. I didn't need to choose between them. I didn't need to choose between Amy and Mom. I could hold both of them in my heart, but I could also let go of the things that had been holding me back. I'm not leaving you, Mom, I said quietly, but I need you to understand that I can't live in a lie anymore. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I understand, she whispered, but it doesn't make it any easier. And just like that, the journey of healing began. Slow, painful, but real. I was learning to trust again, to trust in the truth, to trust in the love that had always been waiting for me. By the time the bank ruled in Amy's favor, our lives had split cleanly in two, the family I came from and the one I was rediscovering. Donna avoided my eyes whenever we crossed paths in the house, her silence a kind of self-imposed punishment. Dad stayed mostly in his office, shuffling papers that didn't need shuffling, staring at the same adoption documents as though one extra glance might change their meaning. Amy and I, meanwhile, started to rebuild something neither of us had words for yet. She called every morning before work, sometimes just to say good luck on a test or to tell me the weather in her town. It wasn't much, but it felt like sunlight filtering through a crack in the wall. When the fraud department confirmed that Amy's monthly transfers had funded the house renovations and the new car, Dad's last thread of denial snapped. He filed for separation the same week. I can't trust her anymore, he told me quietly, his voice brittle. If she could lie to both of us for 6 years, what else was she hiding? Mom didn't protest. She simply stared at the divorce papers, eyes dry, like all her tears had been used long ago. When she finally spoke, it wasn't anger that came out. It was exhaustion. I thought I was protecting us, she whispered. If the world knew the adoption wasn't clean, they could have taken you away. I had to make sure that didn't happen. By stealing from her? I asked. Her eyes flickered. By keeping control, she said. Control was all I had. Control had built her prison, and she was still clinging to its bars. The more she spoke, the more I saw that fear had guided every choice she'd made. Not greed, not even hatred, just fear of losing what she'd claimed. When I told Amy, she didn't gloat or curse. She sighed. She loved you, Leora, she said softly. But love twisted by fear stops being love. It becomes ownership. That line haunted me for days, because even as I moved closer to Amy, I could still feel the echo of my mother's hands, guiding mine through school projects, her voice calling me in for dinner. Donna's love had been real. It had just come wrapped in lies. The summer before graduation, I decided to move in with Amy. Not permanently, just for a few months to figure out what came next. Her house smelled of lavender and old wood, and there was always a soft hum from the neighborhood dogs she looked after from the veterinary clinic. At night, we'd sit on the porch swing, sipping tea, sharing stories about the years we'd lost. Sometimes she'd look at me in the fading light and say, "You hum like I do when you think." And I'd realize she was right. It was in the small things, the way we stirred tea, the rhythm of our breathing, that I recognized her most. Dad visited one weekend. He and Amy sat across from each other at the kitchen table, two people who had lived the same tragedy from opposite ends. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I should have questioned her when she told me you were dangerous, unstable." Amy gave him a long look before nodding. "I understand. You believed your wife. Most people would have. But believing her hurt you," he replied, "and it hurt Leora." For a moment, the two of them just sat there, the silence between them heavy but not hostile. It felt like closure beginning to form, not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. Graduation came a month later. Both my mothers attended. They sat on opposite sides of the auditorium, Amy and her husband David near the front, Mom and Dad further back, but for once, everyone stayed civil. When the ceremony ended, Amy approached Donna in the parking lot. "Thank you," Amy said quietly. Donna blinked. "For what?" "For taking care of her when I couldn't." Amy's tone held no sarcasm, only truth. "I don't agree with what you did, but I can't deny she turned out to be an incredible young woman." For a long moment, Mom couldn't speak. Then she whispered, "She is incredible, and I'm sorry." Amy nodded. "So am I." They didn't hug. They didn't become friends, but they walked away from that conversation lighter than when they'd arrived. And for me, that was enough. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time since the whole thing began. I wrote that maybe healing wasn't about choosing sides, but about learning to stand between the wreckage and still breathe. That maybe forgiveness wasn't about approval, it was about freedom. Dad moved out 2 weeks later. He left me a note that said, "I'll always be proud of you. Keep asking the hard questions. They're the only ones that matter." As I folded the note and tucked it into the envelope Amy had once used for her letters, I realized something simple and terrifying. The truth had cost us everything we thought we were, but it had also given us back who we really are. 2 years later, I stood in the mirror before class and barely recognized the girl staring back. Same dark eyes, same quiet determination, but now they carried history instead of confusion. I was 19, in my second year of college, majoring in social work with a focus on family advocacy. Every day in class, when professors talked about fractured homes, closed adoptions, or trauma bonding, I felt those words in my bones. They weren't theories to me, they were memories. Amy and I spoke every day. Sometimes it was short calls about ordinary things, groceries, recipes, her clinic's stray cat. Other times, it was long, late-night talks about everything we had missed. She came to my school events, sat proudly in the crowd with her husband David, and introduced herself as my mother. Not birth mother, not biological, just mother. And I didn't correct her because she was. The legal case had finally closed. The bank's fraud division recovered most of the money Mom had redirected, and the court approved a restitution plan. Donna agreed to use the repaid amount to fund a scholarship for students from single-parent households. When she signed the check, she said, "Maybe some good can come out of all this." It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was a start. Dad's divorce had gone through quietly. He'd moved to a smaller house, started dating a woman named Elise, who knew everything about our family story before the first dinner. She treated Amy with respect, even warmth. Dad said it felt like finally being able to breathe again. As for Mom, she started therapy. It was court-mandated at first, but she stayed even after the requirement ended. We spoke once every couple of weeks, short, careful conversations that never lingered too long. There was distance, yes, but also a strange peace. She'd stopped trying to control the narrative. She'd stopped insisting she was the only mother I had. "I know I can't change what I did," she said once over coffee, her hands trembling slightly, "but I can make sure I never do it again. I'm learning to let go." I believed her. For the first time in years, I truly did. Amy and I planned a trip together to visit my biological grandparents' graves. She'd wanted to take me there for years, but I hadn't been ready until now. The morning we left, she opened a small wooden box she kept in her closet. Inside were 18 birthday cards, each one written but never sent. She had saved them all, the love letters of a mother without permission to love. "We'll open them together," she said softly, "all 18 at once, like the birthdays we missed." When we arrived at the cemetery, the air was still and full of memory. Amy laid flowers, white lilies, her mother's favorite, on the graves, then took my hand. "They would have loved you so much," she whispered. "They never stopped asking about you." I knelt beside her, tracing the engraved names with my fingertips. It struck me how much pain and love could live side by side in a single story. As we drove home, I thought about everything that had happened, how a single question about an allowance had unraveled an entire life of deception. If Dad hadn't asked that night, if I hadn't questioned it, if Mom hadn't dropped that envelope, I might still be living in ignorance, believing that truth was whatever someone told me it was. Now I knew better. Truth surfaces eventually, sometimes painfully, sometimes too late, but always with purpose. And when it does, it doesn't just destroy, it rebuilds. That night, Amy and I sat on her porch swing again, the same place where I'd first learned how much of me had come from her. She poured us tea and looked at me with quiet pride. "You're spending it now," she said suddenly. "Spending what?" I asked. "The allowance," she said with a smile. "All those years I thought I was helping raise you from afar, but you're spending it now, on becoming who you're meant to be." I laughed softly, blinking back tears. "I guess you were paying my allowance all along," I said. We sat in silence for a while after that, watching the last light fade. The world didn't feel perfect. It still carried scars. still whispered what ifs, but it felt real, and that was enough. When people ask me about my family now, I tell them the truth. I have two mothers, one who raised me and one who gave birth to me. I'm lucky to have both because the truth, no matter how messy, is still the most beautiful thing I've ever owned.